Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 20th episode of 2024. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. Today in Washington, the House Communications and Technology Committee will hold a hearing on the NTIA 2025 budget. NTIA Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson will testify, and we expect the focus to be largely on timing and when BEAD approvals are coming. As of now, 7 states have had their initial proposals for BEAD approved, with Washington, DC, Delaware all being recently added. So 49 states left to go, states and territories, that is. Also, Congress continues to look to allocate more funding for the ACP. So tomorrow, legislation will be considered in the Senate Commerce Committee that would allocate additional funding for the program until a long-term solution can be identified. So we're not giving up, we're still pushing, try to get this ACP funded again. And the Fiber Broadband Association's next regional Fiber Connect workshop would be held in beautiful Deer Valley in Park City, Utah on Tuesday, June 4th. Deer Valley is just such a special place, especially in June, so we hope that you'll come and join us. And after Deer Valley, we'll be in Des Moines in September. We'll make our first Canadian regional. We'll be in October in Calgary. Then we'll be in Albuquerque in November. And of course, Fiber Connect 2024 in Nashville, July 28th to 31st. And we're 11 weeks out and our registration is 50% higher than last year's record. So this is going to be a really blowout, really special event. So I hope you guys are all there. That brings us to today's Five for Breakfast session. Our guests are our good friends, Sachin Gupta with Centranet and Jordan Gross with Lumen. They chair the Fiber Broadband Association's Middle Mile and also public policy working groups. Their topic today is let's meet in the middle. 42 million last mile connections are a dream without rural middle mile. But before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Before I go over a couple of logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if everyone would keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode. To ask a question, please type it into the question box located in the control panel on the side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. And finally, at the conclusion of this presentation, you will be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate the input. With that, I will pass it back over to Gary to once again introduce our panelists and get us started.
Thanks, David. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber Breakfast, our guest was my good friend Joanne Hovis, the president of CTC, who discussed the inside scoop on what's coming with BEAD. And wow, I learned so much from Joanne every time I talked to her. Great session. Joanne works with a number of the states across the nation implementing their BEAD and other broadband funding programs. So she's just a wealth of knowledge on what's going on. So if you missed it, I encourage you to watch the replay on our website. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guests are my good friends, Sachin Gupta with Centranet and Jordan Gross with Lumen. They chair our Middle Mile and public policy working groups. And today they're going to talk about let's meet in the middle. 42 million new last mile connections are a dream without rural middle mile. So Sachin Gupta is the Director of Government, Business and Economic Development with Centranet. He represents the NRECA on the FCC's Technical Advisory Council. He also is on the NRECA Steering Advisory Group. And at Fiber Broadband Association, Sachin serves as the Secretary on our board of directors. He's a member of Oklahoma's Broadband Expansion Council, which advises the Oklahoma State Broadband Office to create recommendations on new policies and incentives. He's a chair of the Middle Mile Working Group at the Fiber Broadband Association. He's a member on the Innovation Business Opportunity Committee at NTCA. So over the last 18 years, he's had a diverse career working in product management, business development, and marketing for large government contractors. He's traveled and worked with government officials in 32 different countries, advocating for network smart defense and security solutions. He's represented the Cooperative Broadband Coalition, a coalition of 10 electric co-ops, and advanced his agenda at the state and federal levels. Sachin has a master's in mechanical engineering and telecommunications management from Oklahoma State University. Go Cowboys. Jordan recently joined Lumen Technologies as the Director of State Government Affairs. His focus is on Lumen's digital inclusion initiative, which includes utilization of their national middle mile, fiber middle mile network, and developing the public-private partnerships to address the digital divide. Before joining Lumen, Jordan was the Government Affairs Manager for Corning, where he took a lead on broadband policy and domestic sourcing requirements like Buy America. For the last year, Jordan has served as co-chair on the Fiber Broadband Association's Public Policy Committee, where he assists in the development of the association's policy priorities. Before entering the telecom space, Jordan worked on policies impacting small drone industry on behalf of large manufacturers of consumer drones. He's also worked at U.S. Chamber of Commerce for their technology policy division, CTech, where he worked alongside both large tech companies as well as startups. And Jordan lives in Arlington with his fiance and their corgi, Lincoln. So I noticed you didn't put your fiance's name, but you named your dog. All right, Jordan, I don't know what that says, but all right. So welcome, Sachin and Jordan. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them into the Q&A. So with that, let me hand it over to our chairs.
Good morning. I am, if you guys have heard me, I am one of those guys who talks about middle mile all the time. And the thing I say is that middle mile is like that middle child that keeps getting ignored. And if we continue ignoring it, at one point of time, we will not be able to connect all of these new last mile connections that we are planning on building in the coming 4 years. If you'd go to the next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the NTIA's middle mile program. There was $1 billion that was given to middle mile in the bill, or the IIJA Act. And a total of 39 awards were made, roughly $980 million. The total project costs were twice that, or almost twice that, at about $1.8 billion. So you can see a lot of the companies that applied for this had large match percentages, and the total amount that was requested was upwards of $7 billion, kind of showing how much middle mile is needed in America, especially in rural America. There is a serious lack of middle mile. Even over here on this map where this new middle mile is going to be built, a lot of this is still middle mile that's connecting major cities, Dallas to Atlanta, and so on and so forth. There was not a condition of rurality in the middle mile program that was done by NTIA. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about a few things today. The one thing I'll talk about is the two different models that are generally focused on when you're building middle mile networks. There's a traditional middle mile model. This is a map of Oklahoma. That's the state where I'm from. And this is a map of the OneNet network in Oklahoma. OneNet is the middle mile provider in Oklahoma that was built using the BTOP grants. And as you can see over here, it's fairly one-dimensional diagram, right? You connect point A to point B. You have some points of presences along that path. It does traverse the entire state, or most of the entire state, but it's far away from a lot of rural areas within Oklahoma. So the second model, next slide, please, is organically built. So if you see over here, there are 3 last mile networks. There's a last mile network in red, there's a last mile network in purple, and another last mile network in blue. And given that a lot of rural operators are building their last mile networks in rural populations, you have these last mile networks within spitting distances of each other. They are practically right across each other. My very own network is one roadway away from another network that is right next to me. So you can organically build a middle mile network amongst these last mile networks. There are some pros and cons. to that I'll talk about. But the best advantage of such a network is that most of that fiber is already laid. So everything in green that you see over here is fiber that already exists. And really all you need is to build the fiber in red to be able to interconnect these networks and create a larger middle mile network. Next slide, please. Not a new concept. There are multiple entities who already have middle mile networks as per this model. There's Diamond States Network out in Arkansas, and they are a coalition of electric cooperatives that have built a middle mile network exactly following this model. There's a CORD in Indiana, which is a combination of a coalition between electric cooperatives as well as telcos and telephone cooperatives that is also building such a network. There are many other states that are doing the same thing. Alabama has a lot of money from ARPA that is allowing them to build that. Mississippi is planning it. Oklahoma is planning it. So many states who are actually looking at this model to create their own middle mile networks organically. Next slide, please. So this is an important slide, and I'll pull the slide back up later in the presentation to get my point across. But the bigger advantage of having a middle mile network that is organically built like this is to have a very large number of points of presences. The Achilles heel of middle mile networks is how do you connect to it? How many interconnection points does it have? Can I connect to this middle mile network because they have a handhold or a data center or a point of presence that is close to me? And a lot of times that doesn't exist. There might be a line that goes right across your network, but you can't connect to it. With an organically built network like this, it's a two-dimensional network. You have fiber everywhere, wherever you see that red, purple, or blue. Not just the green and the red, but everywhere where you see the red, purple, and blue. So, for example, in this slide, you can see POP 51, which is, on the extreme right. Even that POP 51 is accessible by POP number 1 or POP 2, which is on the extreme left side, because there is fiber that exists between these two POPs. So that is the biggest advantage of this network, and I'll tell you why in a following slide. The disadvantage of this network is that you don't really have a lot of dark fiber to give because it's cobbled together with existing fiber. You end up having only, 6 or 12 or 18 strands that you can dedicate to this network. So you wouldn't have dark fiber to give. You will end up having only lit capacity. Next slide, please. So I'll come back to the previous slide, but before I do that, let's talk about digital divide and how the lack of middle mile affects the digital divide. In my mind, there's 3 different kinds of digital divide, right? There's the urban-rural digital divide of access, which is equivalent to saying that of capacity. If, most rural locations would still have access to a geostationary satellite getting 2 Mbps down and half a Mbps up, but they do not have capacity. So that's the rural digital divide there. $100 billion would be spent in the next 4 years in rural areas, hoping to close this digital divide. Now, the fact remains that fiber networks would be the one that will close this divide permanently. The alternative fact that remains is that alternative technologies will close this digital divide, and that's absolutely not true. They will provide temporary relief, while they will set us up for failure again in the future. However, even if we build these last mile networks with fiber today, if we have a lack of middle mile in these rural markets, then we will still have a digital divide of capacity in these areas, because you can have beautiful roads in your tiny little city, but if you have choke points on the highway, then your traffic is not going anywhere. It's going to stay within that city, and that's just not how internet works. You have to get out of your city to be able to access resources outside of your city. Next slide, please. So the second kind of urban-rural digital divide is of affordability. And a lot of people have said a lot of things about affordability. You know, Gary started his this webinar talking about ACP, but the lack of middle mile will affect the urban-rural digital divide based on affordability as well. If you have dense infrastructure, as you have in rural areas, then you have a lower amount of OpEx because your maintenance costs are not that much, and you have access to a large number of competitors who are going to provide you with bandwidth and middle mile services. When you're in a rural area, which is sparse, you know, 4 to 6 subscribers per mile of fiber, then your OpEx is high, not just because you have to maintain it across a small number of subscribers over large distances, but also because if your middle mile choices are limited, then you end up paying an arm and a leg and a kidney and a liver to be able to access that middle mile. So that lack of middle mile in those rural areas exacerbates that digital divide based on affordability. If I am spending more money running my network, all of that money gets transferred over to my subscribers. This is the reason why rural networks, if they have the same quality of service as urban networks, always charge their customers more than urban networks because the OpEx is just higher. Next slide, please. So I said I'll come back to this slide, and I just wanted to remind you, right, here you see a whole bunch of point of presences that have been that this middle mile network can access, right? It's a 2D network. So I'll try to explain why that is important. Next slide, please. So the next digital divide that's going to come in the coming future is the urban-rural digital divide of latency. You know, the urban areas, they are less than 100 miles from a data center, which means if Meta or Google or Apple want to put their content in that data center, everybody within that 100-mile radius can access that within a millisecond or two. You know, speed of light about two-thirds the speed of light, which is what it is in fiber, is roughly 125 miles per second. So per millisecond, I'm sorry. So you can access that within a millisecond or so. That is not so in rural areas. And earlier, this was not a problem because, you know, you had the bigger problem of not even having capacity there. But in the next 4 to 5 years, you will have capacity and then no data centers. So no content for low latency applications that is close to them, which means that the rural areas will not be able to access AR and VR and edge computing applications that require low latency because they don't have a data center near them. Now, the relationship between the points of presences in the middle mile infrastructure that is made under this new model is important because these point of presences can act like the data caches, the decentralized data caches, which can provide those snippets of information for low latency applications to the consumers quickly. So you can be within a few tens of a miles of a subscriber rather than a few hundreds of a mile because you can host that content in that point of presence. So the lack of middle mile will actually end up creating a new digital divide because if you don't have a data center, you don't have the latency. And if you do not have these points of presences close to them where data is being cached, you don't have that latency. Next slide, please. I have 2 articles. The links are given over here. One talks about this middle mile model in more detail, and then the other one talks about the latency piece. Thank you.
Well, you know, first off, Gary, you read off Sachin's very impressive bio, but what you failed to mention was also anyone that spends any time with Sachin at conferences, he's also, you know, unanimously best dressed in the telecom industry as well. So I like that Gary and I did not even attempt today with just going with the simple button down, knowing that Sachin's always, you know, equipped with the pocket square and all. You know, first off, really appreciate Gary and Sachin's leadership within FBA and ensuring that middle mile is really becoming more front and center. As Sachin said, can sometimes feel like sort of the middle child. So having opportunities like this and having the launch of the Middle Mile Working Group just lead to more opportunities to put middle mile and some of the needs front and center. So first off, just to give a sense of Lumen's interest, before I joined the company and became more familiar, I really thought of Lumen as an ISP. And what I've learned as becoming more familiar with the company is that it's really more of a technology and services company with services in the networking and security, cloud, and more. These are all of the essential types of support needed for critical uses that we depend on broadband for today, like telework and telemedicine and remote learning. And what sits at the center of that and is really the foundation for Lumen is our network. And many of you may not know, Lumen has about 400,000 route miles of middle mile cutting across the country. And we think of, everything that we do really revolves around this network. And when it comes to middle mile, we own it, we manage it, we secure it, and we build the technology that sits upon it in support of our customers. And so in line with our mission, we've launched a digital inclusion initiative, and this looks at how we can best optimize our network as well as our assets, one of which is our people, and being able to capitalize on that for communities that we engage and close the digital divide. And recognizing, again, that we have this large middle mile fiber network and recognizing it can play a very significant role in reaching the unserved and underserved communities. And so we're looking at this through a few different ways, one of which is through public-private partnerships with federal, state, and local governments, looking at how our middle mile infrastructure can be used to be more efficient and to deliver broadband. But we also think of this as the massive opportunity as it relates to BEAD and enabling BEAD recipients to carry out their projects in ways that are faster, ways that are less expensive. And so we're really thinking about how you can lower OpEx and CapEx opportunity. And so, one of the ways we thought about this is that for BEAD, middle mile costs qualify as an acceptable in-kind contribution, and therefore these costs can be counted towards your 25% match requirements. So tapping into existing infrastructure and being able to build into these communities off that existing infrastructure, this is saving time and money, again, by utilizing already deployed assets. So from engaging different types of stakeholders, we've also found that there's demands from state and local governments operating, maintaining, and commercializing publicly owned networks to optimize these investments. And we found that our experience and our skilled workforce puts us in a great position to assist governments with these needs. And so, one of the things I want to make sure I do on this call is really put out a bit of a call to action, show that Lumen, our doors are open. We're looking to explore partnerships, whether you're a broadband service provider, a local state government, ISPs, co-ops, everyone in between, that we're really thinking through how our network can be beneficial to potential partners and how they can plug in. And so, Sachin, I think, has done a really wonderful job of kind of outlining one of the major issues that are out there, which is lack of funding. Our view is, in addition to ensuring that there's enough funding to build middle mile to fill this void, that we also want to make sure that what is in the ground is being utilized. And again, this is consistent with BEAD NOFO, looking at how states should be promoting the use of existing infrastructure. And we want to ensure that both of these steps are being taken, both investment in infrastructure where it's needed, but also ensuring that where there is currently infrastructure, that there are partnerships, that there's visibility in what's available, And state broadband offices are great at convening. They've shown that already. They bring together a lot of different stakeholders, and we think bringing more visibility to where there is existing infrastructure, where there's existing capacity, is a great opportunity for state broadband offices. Again, sort of to complement the efforts of BEAD. I think it's really essential that we don't think of middle mile and last mile as being completely separate buckets, but really showing how these things intersect and how opportunities like BEAD can also be opportunities to use what's available. Just to close, there's obviously a lot of big hurdles to closing the digital divide, a lot of which are covered here weekly in terms of some of the obstacles. But we're really interested and excited about engaging with partners to collaborate on how some of these obstacles can be overcome.
Well, thanks, Jordan and Sachin. We only have a minute here for questions and so forth, but maybe just start with your middle mile working group. You had Sarah Blue from NTIA at the last meeting. Can you maybe describe who should be participating and how can people jump into this middle mile working group?
Yeah, so the middle mile working group is open to all Fiber Broadband Association's members. If you are a rural ISP, if you are an urban ISP, if you're a middle mile provider, if you are a vendor that is looking at technologies and equipment that deal with middle mile, you're all welcome to attend. You should attend. We have roughly 45 members right now, and we expect to be at 100 before the end of this year. Last month, Sarah Blue talked. The month before that, Jade Paros from the Kansas Broadband Office talked. We are still lining up a speaker for this month, but next month we will have the Broadband Director of New Mexico come and talk about middle mile.
So it's, when you look at it, Jordan's talking about there's a lot of infrastructure out there we need to leverage. So, in addition to building new, a couple weeks ago I had Alabama Power on here, and they were talking about, that between Alabama Power and their Alabama Fiber network with all the electric co-ops, they have 67 counties covered in Alabama. So the middle mile working group, is that a good way for people to identify what infrastructure might be there, and in addition to what needs to be built?
Yes, that is a task that we have in front of us, to create a map, which is a behemoth of a task. It's not an easy task to come up with all of the middle mile infrastructure that exists in the US today. There is no such map today, but that is one of our tasks, to create a map and make it available to all of the members of the Fiber Broadband Association. And Jordan may be able to talk more about it, because that is actually on his plate.
Yeah, well, we only have a second left here, but Jordan, I wanted you to just kind of talk about, since you're the policy guy, what are the policy trends involving middle mile, and what should policymakers be doing to promote middle mile?
Absolutely. So, I think we've definitely seen, really over the last 5 years or so, a lot of changes within the states in terms of, what powers either DOTs and other government agencies, local government, what they have in terms of leasing out their own infrastructure, leasing out right-of-ways, being able to explore some of these public-private partnerships. So that's been, I think, where you've seen sort of the biggest change. Is sort of the what they have available in terms of kind of tools in their toolkit, and I even this latest session I've seen a number of changes proposed and enacted with that look at this space. So it's it's broader than just broadband as well. It's something we obviously focus on here at FBA, but there is should be noted that when you're talking about middle mile, you're also talking about smart transportation, you're talking about smart grid. And so states are thinking about how these things overlap and how you can take advantage of opportunities to both expand in broadband, but also expand in these other really critical areas as well.
Well, fantastic. I wish we had more time for Q&A, but hopefully you guys can answer some of these questions afterwards. but really appreciate, first of all, your leadership of your different committees and working groups and everything that you've done at Fiber Broadband Association and for the industry, and also for sharing your expertise and insights and knowledge with the audience today. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to get back together next Wednesday, where we're going to meet with Peter Supino, who's of Wolf Research. He's going to discuss a fiber primer, growth, utility, or pipe dream. So it's on his latest research. You're not going to want to miss that. So thanks, everyone. And please join the Fiber Broadband Association's Middle Mile Working Group. This is so important to the future of our nation. I hope you guys had a great rest of the week, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.